Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Well, at least as far as the mainstream media is concerned, the Ukrainian summer offensive continues. Again, this was supposed to be a spring offensive, which has now been converted into the summer offensive that allegedly still continues. Now, is there heavy fighting going on? Yes, there is. Fighting continues. We are seeing some very strange operations being conducted by Ukrainian forces. Some of these operations that we have observed with video footage is absolutely heartbreaking, and I appreciate those subscribers who have sent that video footage to me. Some of which I have seen prior, some of it is new. Absolutely heartbreaking, especially the Bradleys caught in the minefield. Incredibly traumatic video, and it just shows you how not prepared the Ukrainian military was for breaching the front lines of the Russian defensive barrier in Zaporizhzhia and other areas as well. The video that I saw, again, and there's a variety of them, but the one that really stands out, again, is the Bradleys caught in an open field with casualties, Ukrainian casualties, trying to get those Ukrainian casualties out of the field, get them treated, and back to friendly lines. But again, very difficult situation that, at least here in the United States, will never show that video at all, ever. And if I were to show that video here on YouTube, I would be canceled, probably very, very quickly. And there are many of those drone footage that shows what has happened to the Ukrainians in this operation. Now, again, what is very strange, the Ukrainians have launched reportedly a very limited operation in this area over here. Now, the deep state map shows this area as essentially being contested or not controlled by anyone. And allegedly, the Ukrainian forces have crossed in small numbers, small platoon and company-sized elements across the Dnieper River to the eastern bank of the Dnieper River in Kherson Oblast. Now, they don't have heavy vehicles. They may have a few light vehicles, but everything that I've seen thus far, it's just footborne infantry that have crossed over on small boats that are now being shelled by Russian forces. We have seen at least one video of an Iskander hitting Ukrainian forces that were hunkered down on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River. And it's very strange to try and understand, it's very difficult to understand why the Ukrainians would send those forces across the Dnieper River. They have the ability to launch drone operations to get good visuals on what's on the other side of the river. They have NATO intelligence that is feeding them real-time information via satellite and other systems. So again, it's not fully understandable why they would have sent these small units of infantry essentially to be KIA'd. And that's what's happening. The Russians are locating where these guys are and then are calling in ferocious multiple launch rocket system attacks, and even Iskander ballistic missile attacks on these crossing sites. Makes no sense. Now, there has been some discussion about the Ukrainian offensive that was taking place in Zaporizhzhia Oblast, areas south of Orikhiv, in the direction of Tokmak, areas near Volhodar, west of Volhodar, near this area here, near Makarivka. So the question is why are not the Ukrainians utilizing mine clearing systems? So I'm going to tell you something. When I was in the United States Army, the tank that I operated, an M1A1 Heavy Common, I actually operated a plow tank. I had a mine plow on the front of my tank. And essentially in each platoon, a platoon of 4 U.S. tanks, one of those tanks would have the honor of becoming the plow tank, having a mine plow on the front. So yeah, it does give you some extra armor, quite a bit of armor on the frontal hull, but it does very much wear on the tank's power pack. It's not as fast, obviously. It's a very heavy device. But what I was able to come to the conclusion when we operated the plow on the Abrams was just how effective it was. I can tell you, we dropped the plow where it would actually operate and not in an elevated position one time. And that one time it broke. And we then couldn't elevate it. We had to drop it off, and we ended up putting another one on. And I'll say at the same time, at least, when I was in the Army, there was not a great deal of attention given to clearing minefields. The battlefield engineers, combat engineers, they were usually responsible for the clearing of minefields, not individual combat units. And when we would war game and conduct field problems, actual mines were simulated by just round, large pieces of concrete with a wooden pole or metal pole coming out of the center. That was a mine. You could clearly see it, and they would just be laid out. And you would have to just circumnavigate that specific area of the terrain that you were trying to operate on. But other than that, there wasn't a lot of demining operations taught when I was in the military. Now, obviously, I know that's changed, especially with Iraq and the improvised explosive devices and the host of mines and other systems that the U.S. faced in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's difficult to say how much training the Ukrainians are getting with or about defeating minefields. Obviously, from the footage that I've seen, not a lot. It's something that it appears that both sides are trying to learn how to overcome. And mines have continued to advance, continue to get better, continue to get more lethal, continue to get more difficult to identify. You can clearly see in these videos, these Ukrainians, they know they're in a field. They cannot see the mines. They don't know where the mines are. And again, if you watch it, it's just brutal. It's heart-wrenching to see those young men being essentially slaughtered in those fields. Difficult to see. And that's what those Ukrainian forces are dealing with. on the front line right now. That's why you're not seeing the Ukrainians able to push south. And when they do push south of these minefields, they end up getting hit by Russian aviation. They end up getting hit by Russian anti-tank guided weapons teams. And then the artillery comes. And the artillery is absolutely devastating. And that's why you're seeing what we're seeing now. Again, if you're looking at this map very closely, you can see essentially the defensive lines that the Russians have set up. These little white lines. These are trenches, fortifications, areas in which the Russians are using to defend against the Ukrainian onslaught. And you can clearly see, again, very limited gains by the Ukrainian military. Very limited. And essentially now, we're not even sure if the Ukrainians are actually in these areas marked as blue. They were in those areas at one point. But then the question is, are they still in those areas? Because they are being constantly subjected to Russian artillery fire, which vastly exceeds Ukrainian capability in terms of counter-battery fire. Yes, the Ukrainians do have HIMARS and other systems that are very accurate, very precise, and they are using them. But the Russians have more, a lot more. And I think right now the Ukrainians are essentially stuck in what has become these kill boxes, in which they can't move south. And then ultimately the question is what do they do? Obviously they were not prepared to overcome the size and scope of these Russian defensive positions, especially the minefields. Now, you would think it would be just a simple matter of bringing in combat engineers, secure these positions, and then move forward. The problem is when they bring up their combat engineers, they are immediately attacked by Russian artillery. So you have these Russian forward observation posts that are able to see these Ukrainian combat engineers, and that's probably why in some of these videos you've seen these mechanized infantry companies try to come in and try to clear out these forward Russian operating areas, and they haven't been able to do it. And that's where you're seeing these Ukrainians just get slaughtered on these front lines. Very, very difficult situation. And right now, if you were to watch some various content providers on YouTube, they are now finally starting to message a truthful narrative. They are now going back from the Ukrainians are going to be in Crimea in 10 weeks to now the message is that they may not be in Crimea. They may not get to Tokmak. And the reason is, as I've talked about in other videos, the Ukrainians, do not have an air force. Again, incredibly difficult to execute a major multi-brigade operation facing a multi-divisional opponent that has an air force and you do not. And it's almost mind-boggling that the West, that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, would be okay with the Ukrainians launching this offensive. You can tell that there is a political component to this conflict that has no understanding of modern war and are sending these kids to their death. Incredibly unfortunate. So what's the answer? What is the option for the Ukrainians at this point? What's the option for the Ukrainian military? Well, they don't really have an option. At this point, the leadership in Kiev, the leadership in Washington, D.C., the leadership in The Hague has indicated that they want to retake all Russian-held areas in Novorossiya, including Donetsk and Luhansk, which had separated from Ukraine proper even before this war started. So that's kind of where we sit. Again, essentially no major movement by Ukrainian forces. Yes, they move up 500 meters. They claim a small settlement area, and then they withdraw. That's what's happening. And they're taking great losses to do that. Same thing on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River. Again, not quite understanding what they're trying to do in this area. It makes very little military sense, unless it's some sort of local operation by territorial defense units. I don't know. But that's kind of where we set for today. Again, thank you for joining us. More to come very, very soon. And as always, have a good day.